This is the E-commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome our next incredible guest, Mr. DIRK HOERIG from Commercetools. Welcome, Dirk.
Thanks for having me on the show, Jason.
My pleasure to have you along for the ride today. We were reminiscing about our younger days, traveling the world, living rough, living in campsites, showering at the beach, and everything else. And we were talking about the fact that sometimes we as humans, we romanticize some of those early periods of our life. But I was explaining, because you are from Germany, you hail from Germany. My first ever really close international friend that I made when I first moved to New Zealand in my early 20s was a German guy who I'm still friends with today. And very early in my career and in my life as a young man, we did 20,000 kilometers driving around Australia, 20,000 kilometers over 3 months, me and 3 German guys. So it was an absolute blast. Germans, one of the top traveling countries in the world, and man, do they know how to travel. They know how to travel on a shoestring budget. It's incredible. I learned a lot from my German friends, that's for sure.
It's probably because of, with Europe, everything is so close. Many of them already experienced Portugal or Spain and doing a little bit of these, camper van trips over there when they'd been 18. And then the big dream is always, California, Australia, Hawaii, something like that. And we haven't spoken actually why you moved from the beautiful California to the beautiful New Zealand, but we can spare that for another podcast episode. Otherwise, this becomes the show here.
Absolutely. Where does this podcast find you? You're in München today,
I'm actually
right?
in München today. It's because it's a vacation week at school, actually. It's not even summer holidays. Summer holidays are coming up in about a month, but kids, for whatever kind of reason, there's another week where they have off. So I'm spending a little bit of more time here. Normally, you would find me traveling during the week.
And how many kids do we have?
3.
Wow. Okay. What are their ages?
They're 10, 8, and 5. Keeping us busy, but they're fun. They're really active, engaging, but yeah, definitely time demanding when you're around. That's also the reason why I'm in our office here in Munich right now.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely amazing. Now, I'm sure that my audience, they would have to have been living under a rock for the last few years to not know who you are. But for the sake of those 1 or 2 or 3 that may not know who you are, the founder and board member and former CEO of Commercetools. You are currently founder, board member, and CIO of Commercetools. Been running Commercetools for nearly 19 years now. So this is definitely not your first rodeo with commerce, but even prior to that, your career started in commerce in multiple web companies, SIs, etc. But for those that kind of don't know your background and how you emerged onto the scene and how you came to prominence as the leader of Commercetools, tell us a little bit about the Dirk that most of us don't know about.
Yeah, so I would try to keep it short. I decided in 1999 to move to Munich to study computer science. I grew up in Hamburg, in northern Germany, in the suburbs, and was a little bit afraid to go straight across the ocean. That was my other thought. Okay, where else could I go in the world? But I knew a couple of people in Munich, and there was a little bit of it wasn't even a startup or tech scene at that time. This term didn't exist, but there have been some young companies trying something around the internet, and the University of Munich is a pretty good one within Europe when it comes to computer science and engineering. So I thought, okay, I go there first, and then let's see where this brings me next. And what happened was that through a common friend, I took over the student dorm of 3 young guys, Karsten, Moritz, and Klaas, who just founded a company in that, 2-3 months back, which was called Hybris, where it said, hey, we're building a standardized e-commerce platform. At that time, it wasn't even enterprise, right? So their product then was called Web Piazza because it was seen like a piazza in Italy is a marketplace where people come together and trade things, plaza kind of thing. So it was like Web Plaza. That was the first product, and it was shipped on CD-ROMs. I think most of the listeners here don't know even anymore what this is, but it had been on these magazines and sticked on it. And for $20, you could get your little web shop solution. But the idea was, okay, how can we standardize e-commerce solutions for the internet? And so I took over that dorm, but already committed before I moved to Munich to start at a different company. It was a time when you just had been able to turn on the computer. You already got a job as a programmer. You didn't even need to be a good programmer at that time, right? So I'd been 19 years old, and they said, okay, no, you need to join us. You are now a senior web developer. That was in parallel while you're studying. It was these wild days. Maybe today it's comparable if you're good at prompting. maybe somebody will hire you for, I don't know, head of prompt
Head of AI.
engineering, head of AI,
Or
whatever.
head of AI
Yeah,
research.
something like that. But a little bit fast forward, the company that I'd been, it got busted in the .com bubble burst 1.5 years later. And I thought about, okay, what do I do next? It was also in the web space, and the Hybris guys, which I became close friends with, said, hey, we have this big office here. We're now not growing so fast after the times are a little bit tougher now. Why don't you move in here and we do a few things together? And I brought a couple of web projects from the context that I had before that also wanted to have websites and e-com sites and so on. And this is then how slowly over the next 1.5 years, this was all 2001, 2002, I started to get into e-com. And the companies didn't merge, but the work profile merged. Or you could say half of the time we worked on Hybris, supporting them, building and rolling out their platform. The other half was client work on the SI side, where we then formed a small boutique SI out doing e-com platform work, mostly on Hybris, which most now today as SAP's commerce platform, because it got acquired in 2013. But it also, I don't know, I remember that I met with Roy, so hi, if he's listening, in 2005, when his company was still called Varian in LA, and thought about carving out Magento and the big competitor, and now would call him a business friend, Stefan, who did Intershop, and then Demandware was always the enemy with us from the Hybris side. So it was a small and fun ecosystem of quickly growing companies where I've been part of. And that was basically my first path or career path within commerce, where I just stumbled into it because I took over the student dorm, and this evolved to, hey, now my profession is e-commerce, and it got deeper and deeper. And after 10 years, then in 2010, until then, we launched over, I don't know, 100, for more than 100 companies, mostly mid-market to larger enterprises and B2C and B2B. Their global commerce sites included companies like Adidas, Puma, Henkel, Edeka, and so on, European brands. But I ran constantly in similar problems. And no matter what platform I looked like, the bigger the companies got, the more requirements they had, the more scale or the more of their traffic or of their revenue shifted towards the digital channels, the more limited the platforms became. And not from its capabilities. When you look at an RFP and the feature list, I would say even this thing that Hybris shipped on a CD had a lot of the capabilities that are requested today, because it's commerce.
Take a lot of the boxes,
retailer, right? So if you take the technical lens off, right? So yes, somebody's selling something, they need a specific price. The price needs to be in specific currency. They want a specific discount because they are great cuts, blah, 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 blah. So all these kind of things are naturally there and had been required. But what has changed was scalability. It was the need for more innovation, especially with after the launch of the iPhone and the rise of mobile internet. Then it was foreseeable, okay, how do we deal with that touch point? And then more and more requirements came on it. And the life, and I think, so you know this as good as I do from the experience, we're both now more than 25 years in the business. If you had been an e-com manager in 2005 versus somebody in 2015 versus now somebody in 25, the profile has significantly changed. And yes, technology is more an enabler down there on these things, and it can help you getting far. It has significantly changed. And yes, technology is more an enabler, changed because of the technologies that they got in the hand. Capabilities changed because of cloud and other tools that came up that made the developer life easier. And that brought us in 2010 to the idea grew the years before, but to the point where we said, okay, we probably need to do a new platform again and a new company, which we wanted to avoid, because the 2 years before, 2008 to 2009, we pitched to a lot of people in our network that run the other companies, hey, why don't we do this in here? And the problem was that their products just started to work, right? So while we worked on the next generation, they suddenly had product market fit. And if you look at the P&Ls, and it's hard for many because it had been private companies, and if you then don't have access out of your network or you're an investor and so on, you can't see that. But Hybris at that time probably was at a 20 million revenue. The Demandware at that time wasn't public. I think they went public 1 year later in 11, if I remember correctly. I think at that year, maybe they'd been at 50, 60 million. That revenue.
Yeah, which was huge for commerce platforms
at that time. It was big, but today, if you compare it, so that's a Series B, Series C company, and it's good, right? So I don't want the outcome small, but it's not an Salesforce or ServiceNow, so it's not in the billions
Or Microsoft,
so it's small niche companies with a 200-300, maybe 400 employees at that time that finally got to the point where said, hey, we can pay our bills. Because at that stage, it's where, okay, do I turn profitable? How fast can I grow? What do I do? And then I came and said, hey, let's throw away the product that we built for the last 10 years. It's not about monolithic JEE solutions or about PHP Symfony frameworks. We need to think about API first. We need to think about cloud native. Let's start from scratch. Let's not keep iterating. Because that was the conclusion that we got to, not overnight, but within a process that we said, okay, if we don't start from scratch, we'll not get the product outcome where we want to get to. And everybody else, so it wasn't, we hadn't been smarter. We just had less to lose or nothing big that we already had been sitting on. And everybody else was sitting on something big that they made rightfully to huge success, right? The Hybris founders, great outcome, SAP exit. You can always argue, is it for the customers the best kind of thing? Always when companies get acquired, it's problematic. We see the same with Magento. eBay was maybe good, but eBay then with the leadership change did not know what to do with that. And then maybe Adobe from an equity perspective was great, but I don't think for the product. That's my personal belief. Same Demandware, Salesforce, ATG, Oracle, and so on. But again, great business outcomes, great value generation, great wealth generation, all a good run over 15 years. And we just asked them before that, hey, throw it away and let's do it again. Or I said, okay, hey, Dirk, great idea. We will probably build the same product as you would do now, but we are just on our track to get that done. So that led us to, okay, then if we don't do it, either nobody's doing it or somebody else is doing it. And then that's even worse because then at night we're always mad at ourselves. So I'd say, okay, let's, after 10 years being around Hybris and supporting them and working with many of the other platforms, we said, okay, let's make a new one from scratch again. And that was then the kickoff of Commercetools. So that's for everybody who don't know me. Now you have a better view of the story.
The full story. I love it. I love that. And I love the fact that you were willing to, oftentimes once a company gets to a certain size, they've got the innovator's dilemma, right? It's like Google. They're in a position now where AI seems to be sweeping the world and they're like trying to figure out this AI thing. And they're sitting on top of one of the biggest data sets in the world from all their web crawls combined with YouTube, combined with Gmail and everything else that they sell. But they're loath to give up, I guess, their market dominance in search, given the fact that 80% of their revenue still comes from
and that's
search
the kind of the thing,
marketing.
right? So they could make the pivot, probably, I assume they could make the pivot to all AI-led. But the question that you raise is, can they monetize that as well? That results as they could monetize the search traffic, because at the end, 80% of their revenue comes from advertising. And can you advertise that much as well with an AI? And that still needs to be proven. And that's their dilemma right now, because I don't know what their market cap is. It's probably 3 trillion, something like that at the moment, or 2 point something, I would guess. At the end, you need to deliver shareholder value as well.
And look, I think the interesting thing about your story, is the fact that there were multiple stories running in parallel, but they were all German e-commerce stories. And I would love to know your take on just why that is. We think of Shopware. We think of Toby Lutka from Shopify. We think of, obviously, he's quite a bit younger than you and me. We're of a more similar vintage than he is. But when we think of some of the most popular, some of the most powerful, both enterprise as well as non-enterprise e-commerce platforms, they have either originated from Germany or they have been originated in companies that have been led by Germans, regardless of where in the world they may be headquartered. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Germans are so hot to trot on this e-commerce thing and building tools for merchants?
Okay. I think so. There's maybe not just one answer on it. And Toby, I would leave out here for a second. I can explain why, I can explain now. He founded Shopify in Canada, completely, not even connected to anybody from the scene here. So I spoke with him a while ago about that because everybody else knew each other somehow. And
so he wasn't in the German e-com scene?
Not at all. And when I met with him first time a few years back, I was actually the first one that ever said, okay, how can this not be that you're not with, I don't know, Karsten or Stefan from Demandware or some of the others who said, no, we just did our thing here and became big. And the others never reached out. And I said, normally it's like sports, right? So a lot of the people know each other in between because you meet at the same events, you compete with the same customers, often. So how I see our industry, at least with most of them, there may be some, I don't know, the German saying is maybe there are a few bad eggs in the basket, but most of the people, even that we are competing with against pretty hard during the day, I would call friends, at least in the evening, and I always like to go for a drink with or spend time with, because it's like sports, right? So during the day, that's a job, we compete against each other, but that doesn't mean that at the end we're in the similar kind of game and doing same things. But so on your question, there are 2-3 things why I believe it had been growing in Germany so quickly. First, within Europe, it is the largest B2B market. From the B2C size, it's similar than the UK. From the B2B side, it's bigger because a lot of the manufacturing companies historically, unfortunately, but I don't want to have a political podcast here, this might change going into the future, but the heritage in Germany is that a lot of manufacturing on these hidden champions, so companies that do more than $1 billion of revenue, but that nobody ever heard of, there are thousands of them, right? So they're producing some kind of gearbox for elevators in airplanes or whatever, those kind of things.
Yes.
They needed technical solutions, both on the product management, data management, and then at some point that got into retail. And SAP did well as a company on providing technology on the enterprise resource planning, but it was slow in adopting e-commerce, because they always looked at the back end set of the business processes. So I would say the market, that is a market, and maybe explains why a lot of companies, some smaller, some larger, had evolved here. The second is a network effect. Stefan actually was the first one, at least in Europe. I can't say for globally or the US, but at least in Europe, who provided a standardized commerce solution with Intershop. And Hybris actually was a fast follower of that, who looked at, hey, what's happening there and what's happening in the US. And they followed a slightly different principle, but high level, you could say it was a similar kind of approach, what they did on the Intershop side. And out of that, an ecosystem and network had been created, right? So like us, right? So without them, we most likely not have gotten to the idea of what brought us later on to Commercetools. The Shopware founders, right? So it's a similar kind of thing. They're not in the region. They are from this little suburb. I don't know if you ever been, not suburb, little town where it's also hard to get to. And because there's no train going through, there's no airport, you need to. But that's where they grew up, and where they built their business. And actually this kind of niche positioning had been for a long time their strong competitive advantage. I never asked Stefan and so on, so Shopware, on their founding story. My take was that this was a little bit related to the success of Magento, and seeing that, hey, they are in the US, they had got strong traction in Germany as well, and looking for a local solution in here. There had been a couple of these. I think there had been PrestaShop or so in France, and some other versions that had been, I would call them the local Magento companies.
The local heroes.
Local heroes that are similar in a similar kind of framework, not same, but go in a similar approach for mid-market companies. But
open source basis.
Yeah, long story short, there's a strong B2B market, a solid, large B2C market, not as big as the US, but 4th, 5th largest in the world on the B2C side, probably the 2nd largest to largest on the B2B side, with already strong backends, often coming from SAP, where okay, you have some structured data, some structured processes, and the rise of the internet at that time, how could you commercialize it? And then a lot of these platforms spun out. And then an ecosystem had been created. That there is still so many Germans represented by that, I think that's just luck that there had been ambition from some of these founders to make it big. So Stefan, always with Intershop and Demandware, wanted to build big companies. Carsten, who's now running Celonis, another huge company, which is even bigger than Hybris had been, and Moritz, Klaas, and so on, always wanted to build a category leader at that time. Similar like ATG did when that came out of Boston. Or Roy with Magento, who said, hey, different approach. I want to go the community track, but also make something big, right? And when the market and the timing meets a team that is really ambitious and then executes, then you often come to that. But that's a third point. I think that's It's just luck and a little bit of coincidence. And especially now with Toby in there, who out of this box and out of this framework created something even bigger and amazing and impressive with Shopify there. And not sure if he would credit himself German, right? So probably more Canadian now. And I know for the statistics, it's important and saying, okay, there's so many German founders, but I think that's just a coincidence.
Yeah, yeah. And interesting, I think there's two pieces to this that I think are super interesting about what you just said. First of all, if you don't look just at Germany in isolation, but you look at the greater DACH region, I think obviously this is a hotbed of innovation, obviously common language, very similar cultures. We look at Switzerland, if we look at Austria, if we look at the broader DACH region, this is a very large commercial region, right? Manufacturing, huge exports to the world, lots of design prowess, lots of software development prowess. I guess also having access to of a high caliber at scale also helped massively in the early days, whereas other places maybe not so much. Obviously, we've got Asia now, powerhouse developers all around the world, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Ukraine. We've got powerhouse development centers or centers of excellence. India, absolutely without a question now, but back then, not so much. Definitely not so much.
And you didn't have a Google or a Microsoft and so on competing, right? So for the same developers, right? So if you build something here it's interesting. When we started, and this is more about the hybrid days as well, when we started building teams, we mostly competed with consultancies. Oh, no, I want to go to Accenture, or at that time, I don't know, it was called Anderson Consulting, or BCG, or here, right? So everybody who had was smart and had a good college degree was okay. Why startup wasn't the thing? So why should I take this?
I want to go management consulting and make the big bucks, or go into finance.
Go into finance, management consulting, investment banking, something like that. Fly around the world, make a lot of money, and why should I
go at your bank, whatever? Yeah, and I think that was a unique period in, I guess, human history, but definitely tech history, that created an environment where it was ripe for the kind of innovation that you guys collectively brought to the table, because you were all pushing each other, as you said, competitively behind the scenes, supporting each other. I almost compare that early tech scene in Germany and in the wider DACH region. I compare that almost like where Israel has gotten to, because we see so many commerce-related tech companies or straight up commerce companies coming out of Israel. And I've had probably, 20 Israeli-founded led companies on the podcast, and all of them know of each other. They all have been to similar, they all are of a stage.
They have a much better network, and they have a much better incumbent setup. So there's always the Silicon Valley is one part of it, and that's a kind of extreme, and I don't think these kind of things can be copied. But then the question is always, how do we incubate? And we've now a few things, for example, in Germany and in Munich around the CDTM, it is called, where Personio and a few others are coming from. But even if you look into the details there, because it's out of the University of Munich, yes, we are all credited to come from there. But most of the companies, we don't know each other from there. It's just where we went to college. So the story there is even told bigger than it actually is, which is, I see it positive. I had a discussion recently about it, because it means there's even room for improvement and things that you can do better. And if we look at Israel, how many tech companies are constantly at a world-class level coming from there? And it's not only security is one thing. Yes, they always have been strong there. But even in other fields where they're innovating, it's just impressive how they are nurturing talent and helping them to ramp off into companies.
Yeah, and I think it's slightly different. The mechanics of that market are slightly different than perhaps how it happened and evolved in Germany, but I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong. The IDF spins off tech at a great rate of knots in Israel. And I know that for example, there's quite a few search merchandising technology companies that were spun off from the IDF, from semantic defense capabilities that were built for scale, but then they were able to spin them off and commercialize them, and people were able to go to market with those technologies. And so I think that that's a little bit of a unique scenario where the defense tech industry looks to actively commercialize technology that's funded by taxpayers ultimately, to spin those back off and make them successful.
It's a completely
Israeli companies.
Different model. I think
it's an ecosystem. So it's a super interesting way in which these markets have emerged, and the American one is a totally It's a weird one in its own right. Well, what I find super interesting about you, and again, I wasn't there for the early days of Commercetools, but I do remember distinctly that you did have kind of these two separate platforms. And if I remember rightly, it wasn't actually originally called Commercetools. The API first platform was called Sphere.
We called
wasn't
it Sphere. So the company, it was a little bit historical. We founded Commercetools as a company before, when we worked on the idea, and we tried out a few things. We tried to use Hybris, customized it in a multi-tenant fashion, trying, okay, could we use an existing framework? We played around with a couple of existing frameworks to see, okay, do we get the same kind of benefits? And then in 2000, and that was even before 2010, that was already 2008, 2009. And Commercetools as a company where we did this part of the work in already existed as an entity.
Okay.
And when we then decided in 2010, okay, no, we cannot use anything, unfortunately, let's start from scratch, hire a team and set this up now for a 3-year build journey, 2.5 years. We looked for a project name. It was really just internally the project name called, and it was called Sphere.io, and that was what we tested on. And then when we went live, we just had that product, so nothing else existed. But we had that product, Sphere.io, and the company called Commercetools, and there was a big debate internally, small team but big debate, and about what name do we keep. And I believe rightly we decided to go for Commercetools and not Sphere.io. And you still will find in some of our documentation and things, Sphere, and it's even
references to Sphere.
Still some references. I think there's still some services running against that domain as well internally. But the problem was, where do we spend the marketing dollars? And what works when you look at that time, now it's agent optimization, but search engine optimization, search engine marketing, on what term do we go? As a startup, you almost have no money, and that little money that you spend, where do we put it to make it efficient? And we said, okay, Commercetools is something that also business people can understand and that they can spell. Sphere.io it's technically fun. It will be a cool name for hackathons. This is great. I don't know, API days, these kind of things, but it's not self-explaining, and it will make it harder. And what we knew is we can't use 2 terms in the go-to-market. And that was how this evolved.
You can't dilute it. You can't dilute the message, so to speak. So I love that. And interestingly, there's 2 other things I'd love to discuss about this kind of historical journey that you've been on, because it's been a long journey, and it's impressive to actually stick with it for such a long period of time, because it can be disheartening. Just things always take longer than you think they will to build. It's just the way that it is, especially technical things. They always take you longer. They're always more expensive, and it's always harder to convince the market that the market needs what you're selling oftentimes than you think it will, because it seems like a no-brainer to you, but it doesn't necessarily seem like a no-brainer to everybody else. At what point, because that was early in the piece where I'm thinking back to 2010, and multi-tenant SaaS hadn't taken over the whole world by then, really hadn't. Yes, there were a lot of big companies. Obviously, when we think of the early days of the NetSuites and the Salesforces of the world, they were both proteges of Oracle, really. They dropped out of early Oracle experiences. They're both founders, had worked for Oracle, etc. They were funded early on by Oracle. Larry Ellison was a visionary. I think he's probably one of the most even though his name may not be as famous out there in the technical world.
I fully agree. Larry had a lot of impact on where enterprise software is today.
Yeah, totally. And so what I find interesting is that you went down a technical path at that early stage. You obviously saw the writing on the wall. It was almost like, I don't know, it was almost like you had a crystal ball. Okay, this is the direction that almost all software is going to go. It's going to be API first. It is going to be most likely multi-tenant SaaS. That is the way that software is going to be delivered in the future, from CD-ROM to self-hosted on-prem to SaaS. And how did you have a strong enough conviction in those? Because it's like a poker game. Win all in.
Yeah, it is. It had been, I would call it, indirect customer feedback. It's not that customers told us that this is what they wanted, but we ran from 2006 to 2010. And 2010 was literally the year where we said, okay, we do this. And there had been a lot of these things or moments where it had been easier to give up and not continue because you didn't get funding. So all of these showstoppers that come in front of you, obviously, they always appear. I would say to almost everybody that's trying to build something big, and we had them as well. But the conviction, we got fully convinced in 2010 that this should work out, or we couldn't find an argument, and we looked a lot around, and I'd been on probably 60, 70 startup stages pitching this idea for seed funding and so on. Maybe less for the funding, but more for the feedback and for refining the pitch and all of these things. And we had been at the point where we didn't find a logical argument. And when you experience the problem across multiple customers strong enough, and you don't see it as your personal problem, I think this is where things then got a little bit tricky, when you believe it's a big problem, but the rest of the world doesn't care. But at that time, we maintained about 60, 70 customers with the agency. And maintaining meant we had been running hosting for them, support.
And this was still mostly on your old platform.
It was 80% Hybris. It was a little bit of our Hybris on steroids solution as well that we had, but it was a Hybris. It was that, a little bit Magento, and a few other solutions that we supported.
Sure.
And the problem was always first scalability on peak traffic. And the extreme had been Red Bull. We won redbull.com. And at that time, it was when their awareness or visibility globally had been growing exponentially because they just bought the Formula One teams or built, I don't know how they set it, but they launched their Formula One teams, however they got there at that time. And then with this German guy, Sebastian Vettel, suddenly winning races and becoming world champion, they had this guy, Felix Baumgartner, that said, hey, I can jump out of space with the parachute. And all of these kind of
everything.
And what this caused is, so this is all on TV globally, and people go on their website and they click on shop. So not talking about the psychology here, but a lot of people are then on the website while these things are on TV in about 150 nations out there in the world. And their website was constantly crashing. And even we had a, I don't know, at that time it was a rec space. So AWS and GCP and Azure, those kind of things barely existed at that time and hadn't been enterprise ready and so on. So we did it with Rackspace. We did it with a lot of self-hosted things. We drove in our old cars servers to the data center almost monthly to extend it. So all these kind of things. So that was the one thing. And yes, Red Bull was an extreme, but we got the same experience on customers calling us in, I don't know, 2 months before Christmas. Oh, is our site up and ready? And we expect 2 times the traffic. And we had been about, yeah, it is. We did all the work. We did all the testing, blah, blah, blah. How can we avoid them calling us all the time and also ensure them that this is running? And if they have even higher peaks, how can we scale up, but also can scale down? Because Red Bull probably doesn't care so much because they have enough money, but every, I don't know, middle-sized company that's more on a budget might not want to pay for, I don't know, 500% the infrastructure that they need on, I don't know, 340 days a year.
Annual dedicated servers. They're not going to want to pay.
So that was the one thing. The second was, and I don't know how that was for you, but the migration business of enterprise licenses was nothing that I like to be as an SI. Getting from version X to version Y. And I got it. And I don't know if it's IBM's fault or whoever came up with this model in the 70s, that a lot of the revenue can make just on, okay, come up with a new version, put the last version out of support, force them, because otherwise nobody who's public can run on an unsupported version. So I get that, selling that, and especially to companies who want to innovate and do things where I said, hey, I can give you 500,000 for either the new thing here and we do something cool, or I can give you 500,000 for migrating us from version X to version Y. And that was the second thing. And this is about multi-tenant cloud, because it had been 2 things that came together. We first thought about this multi-tenant cloud about, okay, this can give us the elasticity to scale up and down and ensure that customers can deal with the traffic peaks. And then multi-tenancy and also the architecture approach to work, upgrading all of the customers at the same time so that nobody needs to care about versioning on what's working, so that they can put at least not all, because you still have some things that you need to do. But let's say instead of just having 20% of your budget on innovation, you can suddenly put 60, 70% of your budget on innovation. And this should hit traffic revenue. So that was the second thing. And
now, sorry to interrupt. Before you get onto that final thing, one of the other challenges that I experienced at that time, because I was heavily embedded in the Magento ecosystem at that time, I entered the Magento ecosystem in 2008, And the other thing that I found was every single client engagement we had as an agency and as an SI partner was helping the customer decide which version they launched on. Because usually there was like a stable version, there was a more cutting edge version, but it was usually in beta at that time. Okay, cool. Are you willing to
or should we
risk
wait a
getting
year?
cut?
Should we even wait a year until we do something because the next version then is coming out?
Correct. And so everybody was acting like a deer in the headlights, even the SI partners. And this was an absolute nightmare. And I'm not going to name names, but I still have that today with some platforms, particularly in the B2B world, that are
this is
in
not
their
gone.
version.
We have 25. This is not gone. There's still, especially in the enterprise, there's still 75% of all of the companies out there running on 20-year-old legacy software that are migrating from version to version. These products might be called cloud or commerce cloud, but at the end, you can configure them.
But they're past. They're not multi-tenant.
They're still the same. They're still the same, now just coming in a hosted flavor. And so the third part, and that was actually the trigger element, was that we saw mobile internet growing. We tried the multi-tenant before, and actually customers liked it, what we did there. And that was when we tried it. That was as Hybris on steroids. But it was not enough to really make a big splash, especially at that time, because cloud was early on. It was still the days where you needed to explain what a cloud is. It was always like, okay, cloud is somebody else's computer or something like that. And so that had been an early challenge. And for building a high-scale global company, just having the same product like Demandware or Hybris or Magento in a multi-tenant fashion. So the multi-tenancy was a too technical argument at that time that we could convince enough businesses. We could convince some, but not enough where it said, okay, this is a venture capital case, or this is a high growth case. This is more like we can build I don't know.
This is more of an edge case.
We could make a $5 million, $10 million business with 30 people here, which is great. But our question was, is then the effort and the risk worth it versus that we saw the outcome limited? And what changed the game for us was that with the rise of the iPhone, and in 2010, the numbers had been small, but mobile internet adoption and also commerce started to grow exponentially. Even it was at the single digit numbers percentage-wise, right? So 2-3%.
But
it was
the
clear
year
that
growth was
the forecast suddenly became that, hey, 2015, this might already be at 40-50%, at least on mobile internet, not commerce, but mobile internet compared to desktop internet, and commerce maybe 20%, maybe 25%, where we said, okay, this will matter. And do we need to treat it as a side channel? So do we have to use solutions that had been built for the desktop? And at that time, it was apps. It was less about PWA and other technologies. But the question that we had more on a 30,000 feet altitude was, okay, it's now the smartphones, tablets are launching, there's more coming. And is commerce actually, because in the past, we all built it. And for what Amazon did on their own to provide a product that imitates Amazon's website behavior on a desktop. That's where they're all coming from. And we've said, okay, should we think about a commerce operating system? We even called it Sphere OS at a time internally, and we had these marketing names playing around with that in 2012 and 13. And we said, okay, I'm not sure if operating system is a good term or not. Anyway, but the idea was more on having a commerce platform that is in that way future-proven. We said, okay, all the functionality has to be in the backend. It's not about, yes, these things evolve to composable and MACH and all of these marketing terms that we are great or not great in the technology domain. But the fundamental idea was have one platform where the core processes and data are, that's highly scalable, super efficient, that's multi-tenant, where you don't need to worry about versions and upgrades and so on. And if we expose everything as an API, that is super fast responding. And that was actually our own premise when we started with the development team, end of 2010, working on it. We said, hey, this will get huge. And what we need to design needs to respond in milliseconds on every API endpoint, no matter if it's product catalog, if it's order creation, if it's customers,
or data,
and so on. Because we don't know the use cases. It can be B2C, it can be B2B, it can be a web shop that's running on it, it can be a mobile app, it can be a car.
It could be a
now it's AI, right, on it, because an MCP is basically, I don't know, tech guys now will punish me for that, right? So call it a wrapper around an API on it, but it's making it at least easier for AI in a standardized way to consume APIs. But no matter who the buyer is, right? So, and the buyer what the interface is. We wanted to have something that's future proven and that's flexible, plus that's developer friendly. And that was the last and fourth part on it. So not what changed. So what changed was cloud and mobile. And where we said, okay, now we have enough of the belief. You ask about why had we been convinced? And we said, okay, nobody wants to migrate from version to version. Mobile will matter. More channels will come. A monolithic solution, you can launch, not all of them, but some of them quicker, and they have their use case. But if you want to have all of these touch points under one platform, I don't believe that taking a web shop solution and then putting APIs on top of it, so API last versus API first, is a good approach. The others will do it because their companies are at a point where they can't get back to zero, so they can just iterate on what they have. We didn't foresee that they're all selling. That was actually for us the best situation that could happen in hindsight, that they all sold their companies that had strong and good teams, except Toby, which I love him for, because therefore we have great competition and it's amazing because that's also what you need. But for us in the enterprise market, it had been great that everybody sold their business, made their money, earned out, and stopped innovating. And we could then grow on top of that. And basically, what we are eating is their market share. That's what Commercetools is doing since the last 10 years.
Wow, what a journey. And man, you got to respect, especially back in 2010, going all in on something that was, sure, you had 4 sort of foundational pillars of a hypothesis, but you had to truly believe it. And I think it's similar even in my own small business. When I started 4.5 years ago, nearly 5 years ago now, as an independent consultant after many years in the industry, I saw the writing on the wall for retail. And I said, look, this is going to become an absolute crap fight out there for retail. Everybody and their dog is a D2C consultant. Every SI out there is a D2C and B2C consultant. There's so few that specialize in B2B, but yet when I look out across the B2B sphere, it's so nascent, it's so immature, it's so early in its life cycle of digital transformation that this to me looks like an absolute no-brainer to specialize and double down and triple down and quadruple down in at least until 2030, 2035. This feels like where the opportunity, I wanted to skate where the puck was going, not where it already was. And I have to say, I was a little bit early. I was probably 2 years early in that expectation of where the market was going to move. And it was harder. I had to be more of an evangelist in the first 2 years than I do now. And I feel like the market is coming to me now versus me having to go to the market as hard as I was in the first couple of years. But I see parallels in your journey that, man, you had to be,
it is similar.
You had to be an evangelist at the same time. You were trying to build a company, build technology, build go-to-market, build the messaging, founding member of the MACH Alliance, trying to generate some buzz around this belief system, which is really what it is. Let's call it what it is. It's a philosophical approach to software delivery. That's what it is. And I have to give credit where credit is due that you went all in at a time when I don't think success was as assured then as it is now.
Definitely not, right? So I would say success was nowhere visible on the horizon at that time. And we didn't do too bad after the launch in 2013. And we got a lot of, especially within the hardcore part of our industry and ecosystem, a lot of visibility and reaction. Actually, companies that are now much smaller than we are wanted to buy us at that time and so on. So it was an interesting kind of dynamic, but took us until, I don't know, the year that I always say when I ask, okay, when did I get the feeling that things really took off is 2017. So it's 13 to 15 was really just on early on thought leadership. Then we suddenly got customers. We'd been growing. Internationalization became a thing then that we needed to figure out and get going. But so the current that we had been swimming against got less and less in 2015 and 16. But suddenly in 17, it became a wave and we could start surfing. That was how the feeling shifted.
Now, talk to me about B2B, because you guys, as far as I know, again, I've never worked with the Commercetools platform, but correct me if I'm wrong, but you originally set out, now, of course, you built flexibility into the platform, you built API first, everything in the platform, understand that, don't provide your own storefront technology, get that, but you had a very much a retail focus when you first started building the platform. That was the goal, right? which means that a lot of the sort of underlying data primitives that you would need to support the B2B world just weren't, they were not conceptualized in the platform. They weren't there.
Yes,
And that was
yes and no. So what we did is, and we had that discussion literally from day one on, is what is the focus market that we go live with? And we came to the point that API first, so the headless component, though we actually, that was always perceived even wrong and we didn't tell a good story there. We always had front-end components. We also always shipped front ends that you could use. We just had the point, we had it in Hybris, we saw it within Demandware or then in Salesforce and so on, that at 80% of your customers, there was a CMS or DXP put in front of you. No matter if that was the reason why Adobe also, so why Magento fitted in there, right? But
they had AEM.
They had AEM, which was a former day product. But literally no matter where you look at in B2C, almost every company out there, the front end runs on some kind of CMS, DXP, call it however you want to. Maybe the front end components in itself are self-built, but then it's all being fed, okay, there's a DXP, then there's a commerce platform and so on. That was also in the monolithic old school world, you could say the same kind of use case, where we argued, how much time do we need to spend on developing a CMS when they will buy a world-class CMS or what they believe will be a world-class CMS buy anyway and not use ours? And because we ran into that problem as well the decade before multiple times, discussed it with everybody, we said, okay, we will not try to compete on the DXP space, but we provide front-end components, we provide front ends, all of these services. But the core of the platform is headless and the APIs, and you can use whatever you want to. On the B2B side, we believe that this is to the argument that we made before. We said, okay, B2B market is huge, but when it comes to that type of innovation and the demand for adapting on the customer experience more quicker, and they had less pressure from the consumers, right? So consumers came to Nike and said, hey, I have now my mobile app, but I can't buy here. Or why is the experience different? Why is it different data than it's on your website versus on the store? These kind of things. You don't have that when you're a gearbox manufacturer. And I don't know, it's maybe still a fax that you're sending around. So we said, okay, if we want to be successful as a business, we need to do B2C first, but we do enterprise. So the focus on the product was always enterprise capabilities, which means millions of SKUs, so tens of millions. I'm just talking about one tenant, not across tenant. So one customer, millions of SKUs and a complex data model. So we need to have the data modeling capability, which was probably the strongest part within Hybris or SAP Commerce is the data modeling capability. And we said, okay, we want to, what had been great there, we want the same, but just on a different architecture and in modern, so that customers can deploy all of their data model, can be customized. And with many of our customers also on the B2C side are DIY companies, and they have 2,000 product types. So a screw is different than a screwdriver, is different than an axe, is different than, I don't know, flour, seed, and so on, with different attributes. And some of them have hundreds of attributes. And many of these attributes are not even consumer facing relevant because they are just on for the internal processes and so on. And they are all searchable, all filterable, all within milliseconds, all across the API, externally and internally. So that's all there, plus the data modeling capabilities. And we believe that when we go to B2B, this is a starting point. If we don't have that, so customers are a little bit different. You would not use, you can use some of your consumer data structure, but normally you would make it different because you have buying organizations.
You have a hierarchy.
You have a hierarchy. You have buying organizations. You have workflows. You have processes, approval rules, and so on. So the customer object that you have in a B2C company that might be put into a country organization, but that's it. So in itself, it's fairly simple compared to a B2B customer. And so there we said, for all of the other components in B2B, we need to add on new things anyway, because they are not the same than they are in B2C, except the product catalog. And the product, so it's not the same, but we saw from just our structure, we said, if we mess the product catalog up at the beginning, it will be hard for us to getting into B2B. Or it needs a second product, which we don't want. So therefore, and this was also the reason why, compared to some startups that tried to copy us years later, we put more time initially into the development and getting this architecture right. And that was on product modeling. True is, the first years we went B2C only. If you look today at Commercetools, so some numbers are public, some are not. So what I can share is we're above 150 million ARR on revenue and growing. More than a third of that is B2B on it.
Wow.
If you look at that number and compare it to some other startups or e-com companies that are pure play B2B or only B2B, it's bigger than they are. And that's our B2B portion on it.
Just
on that.
And so did you have to, sorry to interrupt, did you also?
No, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, you finish your thought.
To your point, just on finishing there, on B2B, our journey on enhancing these capabilities that started roughly 3 years back. We already had B2B customers before that said, oh, we love the architecture so much. We believe in that concept. The components that are missing, we either don't need, or we build our own in our own architecture, or we use something else. Always said, okay, that's fine, then go for it. But we always said, okay, B2B is for us a super important market. And we believe that going forward, so now it's already more than a third important from a revenue perspective. But we believe that soon this is going to make half of our revenue. If we look into, I don't know, you said 2030, I think it will be huge. And we haven't even spoken about AI, right? Which might disrupt B2B faster than some of these other earlier innovations because they can skip processes now, I would argue, especially on the CPQ side. I believe things will look different, hopefully also for B2B buyers in 1 or 2 years. That said, we put on a track where we said, okay, now we build out these buying organizations, these workflows, and so on. Are we fully done yet on where we want to be with the product? No. So I would say luckily, because we can still innovate, but probably on these, maybe we're at 80% on where we want to be on the B2B side compared to where we are on B2C on the capabilities. If we look at our B2C to B2B capabilities, there's maybe this 20% gap where we believe we're really strong because we always want to lead. And when we go in, our goal is winning. Doesn't mean that we always win, but at least it's our ambition in it. And that's where we are. And I think we have a pretty good offer already today.
And obviously, there are certain components of the data model for B2Bs that are totally different than B2C and D2C. And one of those is pricing structures, right? So typically, not always, but typically, pricing is an attribute of the customer in the B2B world, whereas pricing is an attribute of the product in the B2C and D2C world. So that's architecturally, those are two very fundamentally different things.
I can tell you in 2 minutes, if you want to hear that story, what we had to do and how it was with us on it. So we had for a B2C company already really comprehensive pricing capabilities with pricing lists and so on. They had been a referred attribute list, if you would use it like that, on the product and on every SKU. But the dimensions started to explode because we needed to add more and more on the relations and filtering to each other, as you said, because in B2B, you have customer-related prices. Just think about a construction site company. I'm in Europe right now, not a customer of ours, but it's probably one of the largest construction supply companies. I don't know, if a new interstate is being built, then they're shipping these things. They have millions of price lists, because every construction site is getting their own price list. We can debate and we can do this in a different session. I think they need to all change their business model because it comes from 1920, 30, and it started to evolve. But again, that not the topic for today. And secondly, it takes time for these companies to become a bit more simpler and efficient. What we did is we created pricing as a complete own entity. So price is independent from product and from customer. It's not on one of them. If you would think in tables, though it's not in tables, then it's not a subtable there. It's completely its own structure. And then product,
its own entity.
An own entity, and customer entities and stores and locations and products and so on then can refer to that multidimensional. And as we are unversioned, which means everybody's on the same version, we needed to migrate automatically while rolling this out, all of our customers with no downtime on it. And it was probably the biggest migration internally within the structure that we did, because we needed to carve out a full object with a lot of data during runtime for a lot of customers around the globe. But that's then the impact that you have. And pricing was the one thing that back in 2010, I think we're still proud of internally on how many things we considered, some intentionally, some luckily, that we don't need to change them even later on, that they are still how we would do them today. But pricing was one we said, okay, now it's too limited to leave it in the existing structure. We need to carve it out.
Yeah, I love that. I love the willingness to bite the bullet and say, look, okay, this is hard, this is difficult. It's just like with Shopify or any other multi-tenant SaaS platform. The reality is if you make a significant, what would typically be considered a breaking change, to your data model of any variety. Typically, that would, in the non-SaaS world, that would be at least a point version change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so everybody would upgrade, and so then you'd have to have migration, and you'd have to have testing, and all that sort of stuff. But when you're effectively hot swapping your data model in a multi-tenant SaaS world, that's a big lift. And especially if you're deprecating certain API endpoints because they no longer have a place to connect to because you've now got to do new data model. Wow. Okay, cool. How do we make that backwards compatible? How do we make this change without breaking all of the existing integrations? It's a nightmare when you're in a multi-tenant world. So totally respect that biting of the bullet. So where is, as we come down to the end of our time together, and I really appreciate your time, an hour has absolutely flown by. Where is Commercetools today? We've heard rumblings in the market, layoffs, whatever. You say you're still growing. Fantastic. Where is Commercetools today, and where do you see it in the next 18 months?
Yeah. Okay. Comment on that, as you said, right? So we're luckily in the position that we're growing at the size that we have at a little bit above 20% and profitable, right? So the company is profitable and we're growing above 20%. If we look on, so whoever has access to private data, but even if you look public data, that's in our sector in the current environment, I think pretty good. We believe we can do better, and that's what we're working on. But that's one thing. On the layoffs, I think when people look at our LinkedIn profile, yes, we also focused a bit more on efficiency with the growth profile in the market. I don't know, 2022, 60, 70% at that size. Now it's 20%, but at that time also you could burn a lot of money. Now it's profitable. So we had to make adjustments. We didn't do any in the big kind of way as others had to do it. Does it hurt? Always, because you had to let a couple of people go. But what is always a little, I don't know, it's a podcast here, so I also want to be honest. When we did something and I saw, and I probably blame here TechCrunch for never giving us credit to creating a whole category. There is an independent company that's growing at that scale really fast. They have all access to our data. We always offer them that information. Never asking. SAP at the same day decided to lay off 15% of their workforce and doubling down their management salaries. And they celebrated it as a great move. When we said, hey, maybe we get a little bit more efficient and let 2% of our people go. And internally, we put it in a nice message because we said, okay, we're a human company. We could also just make a shareholder value message out of that. As we said, hey, we feel with everybody. We would also like to be, if it would be even faster growing, then profiles look different. We adjust to that, but that's it. And then, I don't know, it's bad news, or putting things into bad news maybe got more readers. Everybody needs to make their own kind of story. I think most of us, or most of the listeners and people out there know us pretty well. And yeah, that's my comment on that part. When I look forward to the next 18 months, I think Commercetools and the whole market is in builder mode. The opportunity to create something new, maybe in the last 6-7 years, never has been bigger. I would compare to the years 14, 15, 16, when cloud and multi-tenant and APIs and all these kind of things became super relevant for the customers. I'm not saying that they still matter, because they're still the fundamentals of everything. So if you don't have that, then you can have the most fancy AI, but might not get much out of it. But things will change. Buyer behavior will change. I assume that first, the best customer might be an agent in the future going forward. This will take a few years, but similar like mobile internet, there's an adoption to see. And then you will buy, no matter if it's your ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, whatever you use. Personally, not on every purchase, but if it's 25% of the things that you buy, you do it through an agent autonomously and not directly anymore, it changes the game completely. It changes it from a retail and brand perspective. It changes, yes. A lot of things will look different on that. Then the experience, even if you buy brand-led, and brand-led, you're not doing it through ChatGPT, you're still doing it either with the agent of the brand or in some of their experiences. The experience will change dramatically, I think for the better. I hope for the better. It should become more efficient, more tailored, and better personalization than we had in the past, where, I don't know, people who bought this also bought that kind of stuff. I think we're beyond that.
Yeah.
And I believe it will evolve B2B significantly, because all of these steps, okay, now we need to give smartphones into our field on the construction sites, but they're always getting dirty and we don't have connection and we don't have, things will change completely and the flow will change. I spoke with a huge company last night about it that has a really complex CPQ model because of the products that it's selling and will be completely disrupted. AI will just analyze what is the customer already having, what is a better kind of setup, and here are the configurations and products that you need. And then, yes, you still need a seller, you still need a person who's then supporting with that around it, but the process will look different. And this is what we are preparing for. And it feels foundationally that first time we are lucky, right? So in the past, so we had been lucky, but it was a big bet. Now we are lucky because, the architecture that we built is perfectly suited for AI because it's all APIs and MCP over it is super easy. And now delivering on that's more the focus where we need to see that we do the right things versus the wrong things. And plus a lot of stuff, maybe I close it with that. In a pitch in 2013, right? So that I've been on many stages. A pitch that we had was, hey, once we have a lot of customers in this multi-tenant architecture, we could abstract their data. It's not about using their personalized data, but unpersonalized data, put it into, at that time it was machine learning, into system and develop, now we use a Microsoft term, so it's not about that, but develop something like a copilot, like an autopilot system, like a studio for commerce that actually helps you run your business because you have all of the data from the leading brands out there. You're not using competitive data. You're just using, okay, in my use case, what promotion, what should I do here? What should I do for that channel? How could I work with that? And I think this is where now with agentic AI, we're more getting there because it has this human touch that you can easier interact with that. And you can imagine a world where actually, okay, we all have our smart assistants, a little bit like Tony Stark in Iron Man has his Jarvis, right? So it looks as he's doing all the job. Actually, the AI is doing all the job and he's just making some fancy hand movements and says, yeah, build this for me. And then it's being done. And then this is where I think we will go to. And now the focus of me and the team is to ensure that Commercetools is playing the right role here.
I love it. I love it. What an exciting future. And I see a future. This is, I think, going to possibly impact B2B even more than B2C, D2C in many respects. I see a world where the Jaggers, the Coupas, the Aribas of the world on the procurement side are all agentically driven, and they need an agent on the seller side to be able to communicate with and to be able to buy through. So I see agentic commerce very much as the late 2020s version of EDI. I think
I like that.
EDI.
I like that.
So,
and I hope so. Let's get rid of EDI. Well,
finally, once and for all. Dear Lord, unbelievable. Listen, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've really learned a lot. I've really enjoyed the walk down commerce memory lane alongside you. It's been a ton of fun. I will drop a link to your LinkedIn profile and, of course, the Commercetools website in the show notes. But other than that, how do you like people to reach out to you and have a conversation?
Just reach out on LinkedIn, comment below the podcast here in, I don't know, on your favorite platform, either in between or on LinkedIn, or reach out directly. We'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Incredible. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It can be personal or professional. Mr. Dirk HOERIG from Commercetools, what is your question for me today?
Okay. I know you focus a lot on helping B2B customers. When you look into the next 18 months, what's the number one topic that you open up, especially in the boardroom or the C-level, what you tell them that what they need to focus on now?
Look, there's probably two areas where they're most concerned about or worried about, and the difficulty of getting the team on the bus usually starts in sales. So sales, B2Bs are still driven by sales. They're still driven by personal relationships. It's native to the whole mindset of a B2B seller. And the biggest concern when I go into any new business that I'm talking to is the sales team. Oh, you're the devil. You're the guy that's here to replace us with the machines. You're here the guy that's to replace us with the robots. You're here to replace us with AI. So automatically they bristle, it's almost like a visceral reaction to anybody that wants to help them do their job better. And so I'm hated usually when I walk through the door by anybody related to RevOps. But funnily enough, give me 10 minutes with any sales team and I'll walk out being their best friend, because I'm all about giving salespeople superpowers. So that's the first discussion and the first hurdle I typically have to get over when I'm dealing with a manufacturer or distributor. Second thing is, I think 2025 and beyond is the time and the opportunity for us to meet B2B customers where they are without forcing them to change their behavior, but still adopting them into our commerce systems is it's now more possible than ever before. When we look at platforms like Motivate, when we look at some of the automation tools that layer multimodal AI over the top of channels like email, like Teams, like Slack, like WhatsApp, where customers in the B2B world have historically maybe attached a PDF to these channels and sent it to their account manager or whatever, and then it got keyed into an ERP. The fact that multimodal AI can now map these directly into the commerce system, I think, oddly, headless makes more sense in the B2B world, not from a storefront perspective, but from a legacy channel automation perspective than it even does in the B2C and D2C world. Okay, maybe headless makes sense from a storefront perspective in B2C and D2C, but in the B2B world, turning these legacy communication channels into digital commerce channels is a super exciting opportunity, and it helps these businesses extract massive ROI out of their commerce investments from day one, because it means automatic adoption by their customers, whether the customer realizes it or not. And that is one of the things that has me most excited about AI specifically as it relates to B2B.
Awesome. I think that's
Listen,
great.
This has been a fabulous conversation.
That was
What a way to wrap this up. I absolutely love it. I'd love to get you back on the podcast another 6, 12, 18 months, see how far Commercetools has come in this time. I wish you every success with the platform. You're one of the OGs of the industry. Look, I hope everybody figures out a way to succeed in this world, because we simply need better, smarter commerce out there than old legacy thinking. And anybody that's trying to push us forward as an industry, I'll cheer on as a cheerleader from the sidelines. So thank you so much for your time. Can't wait to speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thanks everybody for listening.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.